Welcome everyone to UCGIS Week. We just opened up the room, so let's let folks come in here for a second. We're excited to wrap up the day here with Heidi Batchelor from UC San Diego. And so we're excited to get started with this workshop on geospatial technologies for marine archaeology on Project Recover. And so Heidi Batchelor she teaches GIS at Scripps Institution of Oceanography and at the UCSD Extension. She's an experienced data analyst, having worked with a wide variety of oceanographic data, including side sonar, sub-bottom profilers, vessel and AUV-based multi-beam, and acoustic arrays. At SIO, she manages data repositories and databases for marine data, prepares data for 3D visualizations in VR, and assists with many aspects of oceanographic research, both in the lab and in the field. And so we're excited to have Heidi here today. As you see, you can join the Slack space in the, wrong slide here, sorry, in the 2020 workshops, also with the help attendees. And throughout the workshop, you can put your questions in the Q&A section, and Heidi will be able to answer those either throughout, or we can help answer those at the end. But otherwise, Heidi, I'll turn it over, and it's my pleasure to moderate this session, and take it away.
Thank you. Let's see if it will let me share. Okay. Thanks, Amy, for the great introduction. I'm going to stop my video while I'm giving the talk for bandwidth issues, but I'll turn it back on for questions. And as Amy mentioned, if you have a question, feel free to ask it during the talk. Sometimes it's easier to stop and address something that isn't clear right away than to have to come back to it a lot later. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the things I get to do as part of a group called Project Recover. And what we do is we're a team of all different professionals that we work in marine archaeology. So I'm with Scripps Institution of Oceanography. I'm in Eric Terrell's lab, and I've been with Scripps for close to 20 years doing all sorts of different things. But right now, I've recently, maybe 2-3 years ago, moved over to doing this project just about full time. I'll start with talking about what Project Recover is, who we are, what we do, and how we use geospatial technologies. These might be things if you're used to using mostly ArcGIS Pro that you've never seen before, but they're all different aspects of GIS. Some of them are a complete GIS package with spatial data display, data analysis tools, and data storage capabilities, and some of them just do one of those components. And then there's some that are kind of up for debate. I don't worry that much about what is and what isn't technically GIS. They're all geospatial tools that we use to do our job. So the slide I'm showing right now is actually representative of what we do at Project Recover. On the left side of your screen, you see an actual smoking volcano. And if you look where I have side scan sonar and multi-beam sonar listed, just to the right of that, you'll see one of our underwater vehicles, the antenna peeking up to get a GPS fix. So this is the kind of environment we get to work in, and I'm going to go through many of the different data sets that we use. I'll start by talking about some of the general map background type things. I'll talk about some of our data management systems, and then I'll go into different kinds of data. Because as GIS professionals, we know it's all about the data and how you collect it. That means everything to how you work with the data. So first, why are we doing this? Well, there's I guess it's congressionally mandated. It's a DoD national level organization from the Department of Defense called the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency. And they're an agency, and their job is to return all American MIAs and POWs. So the map I have on the screen right now shows the number of different MIAs and POWs still unaccounted for by conflict. So we start with World War II, where there's over 73,000 Americans that did not come home. And then through time, there's fewer. But right now, we're looking at more than 80,000 Americans since World War II that are still missing. So our mission as Project Recover is to help find these Americans and bring them back home. So this is a collaborative effort that started out with just some people working together to try to address complex questions as to where these people are. So Scripps got involved because we have a large number of ocean instruments and robotics that do a great job of mapping the underwater environment. And we also partnered with the University of Delaware, who has similar capabilities, but some other expertise. Scripps only works on the in the water wreck sites, but Project Recover works worldwide and does things on land and on water as well. The reason that we say since World War II is because when we find a site, the goal is to bring the MIAs home. So the government agency, DPAA, we give them the location in very great detail, and then they can go back and recover any human remains and bring them back. Since World War II, we still have many living family members that are willing to donate DNA to help identify the people. So what Scripps does with that, the part that we do is all underwater, and we have three main steps. We start with what we call the find step. We have to do wide area searches. Our team of historians, they give us a pretty good idea of where to look, and I'll show you how we do that in just a few minutes. But we have to know where to look first. The ocean is very, very large, and even though our instrumentation is amazing, we can easily cover more than 20 square kilometers in a day underwater, but it's still very large. We have to know where to look. So first we cast our net wide, we search over a wide area. We go back and analyze the data, and if we see something in the data that we think might be a target, we go back again and map it in greater detail. Once we've identified the target and what kind of wreck or aircraft it is, we can do the characterization. Sometimes that involves sending scuba divers, including an archaeologist, down to the seafloor to see with their eyes and to measure, look for signs of human remains, and take really nice high quality imagery. Sometimes we have to do that with a remotely operated vehicle or some other way to collect imagery to get super high resolution information so we can measure the aircraft parts to try to identify which one it is. And I have a couple tables on here that just give some ideas of some of the main sensors that we use at Scripps. And I'm only going to talk about the sensors and the data sets that I work with very frequently in this talk. We collect a lot of data, as you can imagine, and we have to store that data somewhere. So the first thing that we do is we collect historic data for each MIA, so each wreck, each case. And we store it in this very large data repository. So we start with historic data. From World War II, the government had very, very detailed records. Most of the time, for every incident where Americans were lost, there were reports filed with as much information as was possible. Sometimes hand-drawn maps, sometimes witness statements, sometimes actual photographs of the crash site. And we can also go back through other archives. We have historians that are certified to do this and get previously classified documents released so that we can see them. So when we collect these data files, we have to put them somewhere. And we work with hundreds and hundreds of cases constantly. So it's a huge data management problem. So we built our own file storage system that has a very easy to use interface. So we have volunteers that put data in, we have historians that put data in, and then we have programmer types like myself that put data in. And so everyone can see the data and interact with it and work with it per case. We start with the historic data. When we visit a site, we put all the data we collect in the same location as well. Sometimes we only have imagery to start with, or we'll only have one document and we can build a case from there. We also get input from the family members of the MIAs, which can be very, very helpful. And here you see some on the bottom right, one of our staff members working with that in the field. So as long as you have internet access and the right password, you can get into this database. In addition to having the data files somewhere, we need a way to find things and sort through them. So we have a separate system for our metadata. So if you think of it as a traditional old-fashioned library, you have books on a shelf and then you have the card catalog. The books live on the shelves. The card catalog is where the metadata is stored. We have the same model, but they're two digital systems that work together. So our case file management system, this is our metadata storage place. So as people find a case that we want to study, we can input everything on a form or upload based on a specially formatted Excel file to add the data into the system. And then we just use a Google version of an API to map the points to the screen. There's very little analysis in this system. It's just metadata and a point, so you can see the point on a map. For most of these points, the vast majority, since this is all housed at Scripps, the database management system is kind of my baby, and then the metadata system works together with it, so I work with that as well. We do mostly underwater work. So as of this week, when I pulled these screenshots down, we were tracking more than 500 wreck sites that we would like to go and visit as time permits. That's a lot. And in these 500 cases, we're looking for more than 2,400 missing American men and women. So the entire functionality of the metadata system is we put the metadata in, and then it populates a point on the map, which has a pop-up that when you click on it, it gives you information such as the country, the date of the loss, if there's concern about which battle it was in. Also a direct link to the loss report. In this one, if you look down to the lower image, in blue text, you see MACR 16272. That's an official military document of the loss, the historic document. And if you click on that, it takes you directly to the data file management system where all the data files live. And you can open it from there and see all of the other data associated with that case. So in addition to just having data, we do a lot of work before we go out into the field to help us know where to look. The first kind of work is, this is the kind of stuff I think everyone is probably really familiar with, and these are just general map-based tasks. So this shows just a few things that we do. Sometimes we have a hand-drawn map, sometimes we have historical photos to work with, sometimes we have older data, and sometimes we have witness statements that we can use. A lot of times the historic maps are going back 70 to 80 years. They're just a piece of paper. They have not been digitized, but they might even have hand-drawn annotations on them or give us more information. You're probably aware that most places in the world, including right offshore California, most areas of the water have not been accurately mapped ever. We're talking not even kilometer resolution for most of the Earth's ocean. So when we go to some of these places, we don't have any information. So we go to nautical charts, which oftentimes will have soundings on them from the days when sailors truly took a weight, hung it over the side until it hit the bottom and measured the rope. That's all the information we have for bathymetry or how deep the water is, or these really old charts, but that's better than nothing. So we really want to take every bit of information we can and put it together. So if you have a paper map, as you know, if you're using ArcGIS Pro, it's really easy to scan it and get it in the system and georeference it. So we have to do this quite a bit. Sometimes we have hand-drawn maps. Sometimes we have old nautical charts. We have all sorts of different things that we work with that we have to georeference or register. Most of the time, if it's me doing it, I use ArcGIS Pro. Most of our team prefers Google Earth, and that's fine, works great. The only issue with Google Earth is it's really hard to export it to another format. And if you're ArcMap users, you'll note that if you're trying to, at least up until 10.4, I think, you couldn't just reference it by just kind of dragging a photo or an old map into place. You had to use ground control points. But in the newer versions of ArcGIS Pro, it's very similar to how you do it in Google Earth, where you can drag an image and stretch it kind of by hand and eyeball it. So it's really easy, it's really fast to use. We also, in addition to maps, we will use historic photos. The sad news is we have more than 80,000 Americans missing, and just today alone at Scripps, we're tracking more than 500 cases. Unfortunately, we don't have the people or the time to visit every single site. So we start with the ones where we have the best chance of success of finding the site. Most of the time, if we have something like these images here that show the actual wreck, that helps tremendously, especially if there's land in the background. We can have something to match it up with. So if we have these images, that's a great starting point of where we should start the search. But many times the images are taken from an aircraft also involved in the incident. So they're bombing and being fired upon, and we're just lucky that we were able to get any film at all. But they're very oblique. So it's not quite as simple as it might look. So this can take a lot of trial and error. But in this case, the upper left photo, this is off of Papua New Guinea. And these are those splashes you see are aircraft that were shot, American aircraft that were shot down entering the water. So we felt like we had a pretty good chance of finding those because we knew exactly where they were. And airplanes are quite large and made of metal. So most of the time, if you're in a fairly not developed region, they're still there. It's very hard to get things from underwater in most cases. So we were able to get modern day imagery of this particular bay and then match it up and have a really good idea of where to start looking. We can also take similar techniques. We can use hand-drawn sketches. Many times the plane behind the plane that falls, that sinks, or that is unfortunately lost, they will have people that saw what happened and they'll sketch something out that night or that day when they get back to the base. And those are incredibly helpful for us as well. ArcGIS Pro is what we use right now mostly for this kind of work because it has the option to easily export as a GeoTIFF, which most of our other software packages ingest directly. Another thing that you're probably already familiar with is using ArcGIS to find a point. If you know a starting point and you have a range and a bearing, you can get to that. And those are just in the editing tools. You just make a new line and you can set the length and the bearing from the known site. So I use ArcGIS Pro to do that a lot. I do that in the field as well if we get more information. And then good old-fashioned maps. If someone calls me and they need a map for a presentation, you know it, ArcGIS Online, in 5 minutes, you can have something that will work for almost anything you need. So we do actually use quite a bit of ArcGIS Online for our immediate need maps. Okay, that's about all I'm going to talk about with general maps. I'm going to go into some more detail of some of the other work that we do and how we collect our data. We collect our data in the field and we need to know where we went. It's really difficult when you're surveying the ocean. You're on a boat, everything looks the same, it's blue water, you send down your robots, you get them back up. It's really hard to not miss places. So what we generally do is each day we offload the data and map it up so we can see if there's any gaps of where we've been surveying. So the first kind of data set that I'm going to talk about is multi-beam sonar. And this is a tool that's used quite extensively in oceanography. And what it is a ship or an autonomous vehicle or robot, something sends down a beam of sound through the water column. Well, it's usually multi-beam. That means sometimes as much as hundreds of beams. So the sound is sent down to the ocean floor. It bounces back like an echo. In radar, they even call it a sea echo, but in multi-beam, we're going through the water column. It bounces off the bottom or whatever it hits first and then comes back. And essentially, it's the difference in time. We can tell how deep the water is. There's a lot more that goes into it than just time. There are many water column properties. Water, when we talk about sound moving through water, the speed of sound in water varies dramatically based on the water column properties. So when I started my career at Scripps, we had to do all of those water column corrections. I say by hand, it was by computer program. We had to write code. So we would collect data and we would have to spend months correcting it before we even knew what we had. But I'm really old and that was a long time ago. Now that's all done in near real time as the data is being collected. We don't do that separately. It comes to us with many of those corrections already applied. So when we use multi-beam, what we get, the data that we get out of the system, we get the depth of the water below the sensor and then a lat-long position. If we're using a ship-based system, we use GPS to get the ship position. If we're using underwater vehicles, we can use many different ways of positioning underwater to get that either through an inertial navigation system on board or through using a set of transponders that mimic the satellites you would use for GPS, but they're underwater. When I work with multi-beam sonar, we use a whole bunch of different software tools. So I'm gonna, for the rest of the talk, just explain the tools I use most often. I'm not trying to sell tools. I'm not trying to get you to buy software. I'm just gonna say what I use and why. And if you're gonna work with multi-beam, I'm happy to talk with you on a case-by-case basis. There's so many others to choose from. So the software packages I use most often are GIS, and this one is a true GIS. It has all different ways to process many kinds of data, and even a section of it called GIS GIS. And it has full data storage, data interactions, looking for things that are within so many meters of what you've already found, and all kinds of ways to export the data. Data analysis includes target detection and full AI. It's a really great tool. It's also really nice that it's easy to load on a laptop. Licenses are very inexpensive. The university price is, I think I paid $2,500 for 10 seats for a year, which is very low for oceanographic data processing software. We also use another tool called SonarWiz. That's also a true GIS. I'm going to show you examples of SonarWiz later in this talk. That one's a little more expensive. 15 to 25,000 per seat would be what you pay. And while that sounds shocking, if you didn't have that capability and you had to pay someone to write analysis tools for you, it would cost way more than that. So again, we have a beam of sound coming down, bouncing off of the seafloor or whatever it hits first and coming back to the ship or whatever platform the sensor is based on. So at Scripps, we have two main ways of collecting multi-beam data. And these are, I'm just talking about the Project Recover ones right now. I'm not talking about the main UNOLS vessel-based ones. I can later, but these are the ones that we use in the field for locating MIAs. So the first one you see here, this is offshore Kiska, Alaska. It's one of the Aleutian Islands where there were battles in World War II. Alaska wasn't a state yet, so it's kind of a gray area if that's US waters or not. It is now, but it wasn't then. So we were able to be fortunate enough to receive a grant from NOAA to map all the submerged cultural resources in and around Kiska's harbor and around Kiska's island. So what you see here is we have a sensor on a pole, and that's the transducer head there on the end. So we have one of our main engineers, Andy, leaning over to unhook the pole, and he's going to lower it right into the water. So this is a pole-based system hanging below the ship into the water. And below it, you see a green colored return, and there's something sticking up in the middle of it. So this is multi-beam data. So we get the depth below the sensor. And this was an object they went over, and it stuck up tens of meters. It was very large. And this, what you're looking at here, is the final resting place of more than 70 Americans that lost their lives when the battleship, the USS Abner Reed, passed over a mine. And so the back half of the ship actually blew off and sank. The sailors were able to patch up the tear. I mean, literally half the ship blew, at least a third of it is on the bottom. They patched it up, limped back to port, and the ship went out again, where it later, unfortunately, sank in battle. So it's an amazing story, but we were able to find this site in 2018. So the kinds of data that we get from the pole-mounted ship-based multi-beam looks like this. So the black and white image is a screen capture of what the process data looks like in GIS. So what I do is I take the data, we correct it for the ship's location and the ship's movement to some extent, and then we can use it to make a map of X, Y, and depth. So we can map, our particular instrument is meant for very shallow water. We can go all the way up against a pier or a wharf, and we can map in great detail right next to an island. And then this is a shipwreck from Palau. You can see the kind of data that we're getting from our ship-based systems. And you'll see there's little wiggles throughout that data set of that ship. Those are mostly due to the wave action at the surface. We didn't correct all of it. There was no need. We could clearly identify the ship, and it looks kind of cool. So this is what GIS looks like when you're using it. Again, this is a true GIS, but we mostly just use it for things like mapping the seafloor and getting all of our data together and correcting it for the motion of the sea and the vehicle. And then we can clean out any extra points, all those outliers or bad data. We have some vehicles that for some reason the hull rings, so we have to write some filters to remove the hull, those kinds of things. It's fun, but that's what it looks like. The main way, though, that we collect data right now are using one of our autonomous underwater vehicles. And there's a lot of reasons for that. These are great tools for marine archaeology, especially in shallow waters. The one that you see here is being recovered by some of Scripps' current staff. Actually, the gentleman in the middle is now at Woods Hole. He graduated, good for him, yay. Of course, he went to Woods Hole, Scripps. So we can deploy them very easily. Usually we only need 2 people to deploy and recover them in any conditions. They can go off and on of a tiny boat, a medium-sized boat, a very large boat, or a pier. In this case, we have extra sensors on board. You can see that center section that's black and has a sensor kind of hanging down a little bit. That's a magnetometer, which looks for large amounts of any magnetic signatures, which we use if we think something that's metal is buried. I'm not going to talk about that today because I don't do that processing. So in this case, when we have the magnetometer, we usually do use 3 people to pick it up and move it and deploy it. So you'll see throughout the talk it listed as an AUV or a UUV. To us, we're using those terms interchangeably. Autonomous underwater vehicle, it has no cables, it's programmed and it goes. We can communicate with it underwater if we need to ask it to change directions or to go do something. And Eric Gallimar, the gentleman in the middle here, he, for his PhD dissertation, wrote a way where if one vehicle, we have usually swarms of vehicles in the water. If we have one vehicle in the water and it finds something that could be a target of interest, it can communicate with other vehicles and tell them to come over with their sensors and map it in greater detail. And so that's all done autonomously. And this is just a couple more pictures of different configurations. On the top left, you see people getting ready to deploy a vehicle from a very small dive boat off of Papua New Guinea. And on the right, this is how the next step. After the data is collected, these are autonomous, so there's no cable. So we can't see the data until we bring the vehicle back to the lab or back on board the ship, connect it with the cable and get the data off of it. And so here you see several vehicles being offloaded and everyone standing around expectantly. I think we just stare at them to will them to go faster because we want to see what the data looks like right away. So we do process the data in every single day. I would say near real time because as soon as it's off the vehicle, we start processing it immediately. So when we do AUV-based multi-beam, what you're looking at right now on screen, these are from SonarWiz. These are screen captures of the best we could process one particular data set that we had. Our group was very fortunate and we finished up in January of 2019. We received a very generous grant to basically soup up our instrumentation for marine archaeology specifically. So of course we looked at these and we said we need something better. So we bought a different multi-beam, and this is the kind of data that we can collect with that multi-beam. Right now I'm showing a screen capture of a software called QT Modeler. This is a point cloud viewer. So the data has already been corrected and exported as an XYZ file, and then we can put it into this particular point cloud viewer. There are lots of other choices. This is just the one that we use in the field because it's really easy to use and super portable and loads very quickly. So what this is this is 2 passes of multi-beam collected by an AUV over a wreck of an airplane called the Norm. This is not a World War II wreck, but it's a great test bed for anything you need. So what you're looking at is 2 passes, and you can see part of the wings and the nose, and then we have the tail. And if anyone in here is a biologist, I'm very sorry for what I'm going to say. There are way too many fish on this. We can't measure enough of the front of the aircraft with that many fish cluttering it up. So we have to remove the fish. So one way we can do that is if I rotate it sideways, now I can see what's sticking up off of the seafloor. And this is in the point cloud environment. And I can either write a filter or using QT Modeler, manually select the points.
Heidi, your audio cut out for just a second.
Okay, sorry, I'll sit closer. So we can cut out any points that we don't need and to make the picture more clean. And if I zoom in on that, you can see a different picture of what it looks like if you zoom in on the point cloud. So you can see that you can very easily with your mouse select which points you don't want in your image and have them removed. And again, I apologize to the biologists. In archaeology, we are constantly getting the fish out of the picture. In shallower water especially, well, in the deep water too, most times when we have submerged cultural resources or sites or targets, they're covered in sea life, kind of an artificial reef situation, which looks beautiful, but it's very difficult to measure things when they're covered with fish. So we have to remove the fish. You can see this is another view where you can see more of the fish. So the final product that I ended up using, we have several passes over the aircraft, and I kept some of the fish that were not actually, because they're fish, they're cool, that were not actually impacting the ability to measure. And what you see is some of the track lines look like they're a little lighter or darker, and those changes in variation are due to tidal changes. As we just know how far below the vehicle, we know how deep the vehicle is and how far below it is, but when the water itself changes depth, we're at the level now where we're measuring in great enough detail where the tide is actually something we have to remove even within a dive. Another kind of data that we use all the time is side scan sonar. And if anyone else is on that has worked with marine archaeology, this is nothing new. Side scan sonar has been used for marine archaeologists for decades, and we use it all the time to image the seafloor. So what you get when you use side scan sonar, the data that you receive is not a measurement of the ocean depth. What you get is a latitude and longitude and a return, a picture almost of what you see on the bottom. So in this image or graphic, you see an autonomous vehicle and you see two light purple beams of sound coming out. This is a sonar, it's sound-based. So we have one going off to the port and one going off to the starboard. And if you look right below it, there's no data collected. These are side scan. So we don't get any information about anything sticking up off of the seafloor, being proud of the seafloor. Directly below it, we have to be looking off to the side. So this is an example of how that works. And you'll also notice if you look at that yellow block, the one on the right-hand side on the bottom, there's an acoustic shadow behind it. Most of the time, it's what our eyes pick up is the change between that shadow and anything around it. I'm going to show you some examples of the data right now. Well, let me show you first how we collect it. So this was off of Karora, Palau. I was the one that took this picture. That's why I'm not in it. I was out there. So what we were doing there is you can see we have 3 REMIS vehicles all equipped to capture side scan sonar, and we're going to take them out to above a site that we want to map. And we put them in, each one goes to a different location, runs its track and comes back on board. And if you look, there's a very tiny boat off to the left sharing the same dock. On that one, we can put usually 2 AUVs and 3 people. And so we would often use 4 to 5 vehicles at a time. To get the data off, we have to come back into the lab. So this is what it looks like. We have all of our vehicles that we used on that trip sitting in a row, and they're all connected with cables. So the cable is how we offload the data. Once the data is offloaded, we use a package called SonarWiz to look at the data. SonarWiz is a true GIS. It works with, we use it for multi-beam bathymetry data, side scan sonar, and we also can use it for our sub-bottom profiler, which we're not talking about today, but that is how we generally work with our data sets together. And we can use them in combination to do data analysis between the data sets to look for potential targets. So the way this works is we get the data off of the AUVs, and then one of the engineers or analysts will populate the project and then start sharing the data to the screen. So what you see here on the bottom right, you can see someone working on a laptop, and that's the engineer that's going to be driving the system. It's going to be going through the data so that everyone can see what they're looking at. And off to the right, off to the left, I'm sorry, you see a gentleman in a bright blue shirt. That's our lead archaeologist, Drew Pietrusca. He is looking at the screen, looking for what might possibly be a target of interest. So this is what they see as that's scrolling by. When you see something of interest, we usually will mark it. And so what the analyst did here, and what Drew did is we saw a clump of something that does not appear to be natural. Most things on the seafloor are not shaped like that. So we would mark that as a potential site to go back and get more information about. And if you look up in the top of this window, the second line down says show features from other files. So what SonarWiz allows you to do is if you have files from a different experiment or a different research group or a different trip, or even a different day, it will match up any targets in the vicinity by location, by latitude and longitude, and show you those as well. Sometimes the direction that you pass over the object can really impact what the looks like on screen. So here's some examples of things that we have found. On the top left, that is an aircraft, a World War II aircraft offshore Hawaii. The one kind of in the middle top, that is an intact aircraft. That's literally our only one. We never find intact aircraft. Most of the time, unfortunately, when an airplane does crash, it breaks up into pieces. It does not stay intact. But in World War II, the pilots were specially trained because the planes were not as reliable as they are today to, if something terrible was happening, to land on the water surface, get as many people out as you could, and then the aircraft would sink. And in those cases, we should be able to find an intact or mostly intact aircraft. And on the bottom left, that's a torpedo dumping site. In the center, we have some aircraft parts. That's more of what our sites normally look like. Unfortunately, we don't find intact aircraft very often. And then on the right, that is what coral heads look like in side-scan sonar. It also matters what kind of sonar you use. So this is from a paper that it just came out from Eric Gallimore, and this is looking at the same submerged target using different frequencies, so different resolutions. So the black and white picture is what the aircraft looked like when it was flying. And then 70 years later on the seafloor, this is what we get. So you can see as we increase frequency, we increase the resolution dramatically. And this particular aircraft was essentially landed on the sea surface and then sunk. So it's mostly intact. And you can see all those white speckles and freckles, those are fish that I will probably have to remove. This is what the end result looks like. We take our targets and then we also look at how much area we've mapped. This is right offshore Guatemala. And so we were able to increase the abilities of our vehicles. We can map more than 20K a day easily using 3 vehicles. So we can survey tremendous amounts of the seafloor. Now for land-based people that can use aircraft and satellites, 20K is embarrassing low. But for oceanography, this is a lot of data. So what do we do with all of this data? We need to make it into a format that we can share with people. Not everyone has trained extensively to look at multi-beam or look at side-scan sonar and pull any information out of it. So what we do generally is some kind of photogrammetry. This is standard for archaeology in general, and definitely for underwater archaeology. It's done all over the world. Everyone who does underwater archaeology uses photogrammetry to document their sites. So what we do is we use it to create orthomosaics and 3D models from all different kinds of imagery. This is one of those topics. There's lots of choices of software. I'm not here to say what one's better or worse. I'm just going to tell you the ones that we use. Many times we can borrow from drone technology. If you imagine drones, and you've heard of drone to map and other kinds of software, we're basically doing the same thing, but underwater. So our autonomous vehicles are really similar to a drone. Sometimes we'll put, we can actually record imagery on them, but they are underwater. So we have some extra challenges due to the water column, but those are the fun part of what I get to overcome. So I'm going to show you some examples, and all the examples that I'm going to show you, the data analysis tool software that I use is called Agisoft Metashape. They have a free version, but the paid version is way better. So this is how we actually collect some of the data that we would use to make a 3D model or an orthomosaic. So this one, you can see we have some people standing next to a remotely operated vehicle. This one's called the Barracuda. The reason we like this one is you look at it, it has all these rails and easy ways to pick it up. And then in the bottom right, you see a big yellow spool. That's the cable. So this one is not autonomous. This is a remotely operated one. So it's on a cable. And this one's very small. It's easy to manage, easy to pick up and put down. So we're deploying this. This is near Karora, Palau. And I was the one taking the picture, but I was out there. It was a really fun day. So in this case, we were close to shore. And see how nice and flat the ocean is? That was a nice day. We rarely see that, especially around here. So any one person can handle the cable. And usually we, just for comfort's sake, we'll have 2 to 3 people lifting the vehicle over the side. The stronger people can do it. I'm very short. I have to do it with another person. But this is attached to a cable. So once the vehicle is down, it sends the data back, the video information back through that yellow cable. And on the bottom right, you see 2 people looking at a screen, and they're actually seeing the video feed in real time. There's all different kinds of ROVs. Some of them are very tiny and even half the size of this one, and some are very large. And usually the bigger they are, the deeper they can go. This one can go, I know we've taken it to more than 100 meters. I think it goes much deeper than that. We just don't have enough cable to go much deeper. But most of the ocean is not in the 0 to 100 meter depth rating. So you have to go with something bigger. So that little Barracuda ROV that you saw, if we were in a murky harbor, and this is, we had video, but I pulled a still for this slide presentation. This is what we see. And you can see a propeller sticking up out of the silt. And in the bottom right, you can see a wheel. This is an aircraft wreck where there were American MIAs. So we found this wreck, we documented it. And one of the easiest ways and best ways to document it is using some kind of video. That gives us so much information to work with. Another kind of ROV that you've probably seen, if you've ever watched any show or movie that involves an ROV, it's almost always one of these bigger ones. So this is one on a trip I was lucky enough to get to participate in 2019 offshore Hawaii. This is a research vessel called the RV Petrel, and they have a much bigger ROV. You can see how large this one is. This is a drone, an image taken from a drone of it being deployed. So this can go well over 1,000 meters. And so here's how we actually use those. So we sit in a dark room. I got to go on this one, so I think I'm in the picture if you squint your eyes. And so we can actually see in real time the video feed from that underwater vehicle. And so the way it works is we see it on screen. So this is Bob Kraft's head. If you look on the very top, that bright orange picture, that's the sonar unit attached to the ROV. When you're underwater, there's no way to know what's ahead of you. Light doesn't penetrate very far. You can't see that much. So we use a forward-looking sonar to look for an object. So we saw an object on that. They pulled up the side scan sonar below it with the targets that we processed in SonarWiz so that we knew where about to go. And the ship's system can line up the ROV with where we set to go. And then we can see the wreckage on screen from the video cameras in near real time. So what we do with that, this image is from the second day we had an ROV dive on this site. So the first day, we took the imagery and ran it through Agisoft Metashape. And one of the things I'll show in a minute is how we do that. And we saw that we had some missing data, places that we didn't get enough data. So we were able to use that mosaic and go back to the site. We had one more day and get some more video to fill in all the gaps that we had. And so just to give you an idea of what the site looked like, this bottom picture on the right, that's a still image taken from the video. And yes, there are so many fish. This is a crashed aircraft that crashed right offshore Hawaii during World War II with MIAs on board. So we get video and we have to do something with it. So we generally I start by taking screen stills. There's several different ways you can do that. I use FFmpeg, but there's many other ways. You just need to get from video to stills. And so in this example I'm showing on screen, this is what Metashape looks like, the software interface looks like if you haven't seen it. And so I use 478 images For some of the other work we do, we use well over 3,000. And this one, the images were very high resolution, and this is a smaller aircraft, so we didn't need that many photos. And then you go through the process of photogrammetry, which is lining up common parts in each photo, which makes it 3D. We generally just use standard photogrammetry techniques to just get the things to line up. We've found with our underwater data that works better than anything more difficult so far, but we're still learning. And then we go through the point of making a dense cloud out of it and a 3D model. Once we have that 3D model, we can do just about anything with it that we like. The first thing we usually do is make an orthomosaic, or a two-dimensional image of the entire area. Before we do that, we have to line up the photos, the images, and here's a different site of an aircraft that crashed. You can see there's just pieces of it. This one was not intact. And so each one of those darker blue rectangles indicates a camera angle. So in this particular case, we saw that we had plenty of camera angles. We weren't going to get better results by having more data. But when I ran the aircraft one in Hawaii that night, we saw we needed to take some more facing the nose. And this is the kind of result you get. We can see that you can put all the images together to make a mosaic of the entire site. A lot of times when we're working underwater, especially if you have scuba divers, you're only seeing a very tiny part of the wreck. You can't see the whole site. So when we can put all of the imagery together and have a complete photographic map of the site, and these are XYZs, they have coordinates, then we know exactly where the object is and exactly how big it is. We can measure distance, length, volume, and we can preserve that. A lot of times, I think, if you're not working in archaeology, you don't think about that these things are degrading every day. So we want to preserve what we have now in case we can't get back to it for a while. Right now, DPAA is on some cases lagging 4 to 6 years from the time we find the site until they can get there to recover any remains. So we want to document in great detail every bit we can of what is there. And this would be true of almost any kind of work that we do underwater. It's so difficult to obtain the data. You want to preserve what you have, and you want to be able to identify everything. And one more thing we can do with this is when we can make a picture like this, now we can show it to people and we can tell them, hey, this is the site. This is, the final resting place of Americans. This is an important thing that we need to make sure stays in the awareness of the American people. And we can also use it if we have family members, we can show them the imagery and they can, in a sense, come down to the site. This is the kind of resolution we're getting. I'm still working on those pesky fish. Most of the time when you do photogrammetry, because the fish are moving, they're only in one place at one time. They don't get kept in the processing, but this particular site has been extra tricky because of the fish. So if you look closely, you'll see there's like a fish tail here, a head over there. It's been interesting. I see a comment coming in the chat about the artificial light. This particular site is a little bit deeper, and so it was very dark. So this one, the lights on this one were used, the particular ROV has these new lights. This is, the RV Petrol's ROV is really, it's the best in the world. And we got to go use it, yay. They let us play with their equipment. It's constantly being upgraded to the absolute best in the world. This used to be the research vessel that Paul Allen owned and used for oceanographic research. And when he passed away, it still kept operating. It's in dock right now. We're hoping they bring it back because it's an amazing ship. But their ROV has all different lighting systems. So we were able to play with different ones. They also have multiple cameras, which are all great and useful for photogrammetry. So the light effects that you see here, I did not add those. That's what the lighting of the imagery that was ended up, the photos that we ended up using for it. Most of the time, photogrammetry works, especially underwater, way better without any kind of spotlight or artificial light. So this one was a little trickier, but I think the result was more aesthetically pleasing than some of the other ones that I'll show you in just a minute. So yes, in this one, we did have artificial light. That particular ROV that was on the Petrel has these giant lights, which is actually harder to work with than data that doesn't have it. So we also have the ability to collect data from our autonomous vehicle. So, you know, when you're using an ROV, it's attached. You have a ship. You have to get physically right over the site. And if you're doing something and people see you right over the site, a lot of times we don't, all the time, we don't want to advertise where these sites are found because these are the resting place of our MIAs. We want the DPAA to be able to come and recover any human remains they can and give them back to the family. So we don't like to advertise where we are, especially if there's people around. So we can do that using the remises. The remis, you can put it in the water and it can travel quite a distance away. So we've been exploring different special cameras that are specially made. They're low light imagers to map the seafloor. So in the bottom image, that's actually a wingtip. You squint your eyes, you can kind of see it. But that's the low light environment. If you went down with just your bare eyes, this is over 100 feet in very murky water. It doesn't even look that clear. So this is actually a good image. But we can use those to make a mosaic. So this is more typical of what a wreck site would look like. This was spread out over quite a big distance, but you can, depending on how big your screen is, there's entire wheels, there's most of a wing in the center. So this was done using only an autonomous vehicle. So the autonomous vehicle collected the low light data. Yes, it's not as aesthetically pleasing as the Hawaii data set, but it was also collected just from a robot, underwater robot. And then we're able to process it in this way. The next thing that I want to show, we've got a couple more slides here, is we use scuba divers with cameras to collect very high resolution images as well. That's the standard way of doing underwater archaeology right now. Most underwater archaeology is in more shallow water or very, very deep water. We tend to work in the kind of the mid-range. So here's two of our team members mapping a wreck. They're measuring it in great detail to try to identify which aircraft it was and also taking photographs of it. So we can do that using several different kinds of cameras, systems. Sometimes we'll even hire an actual professional photographer to come with us because they know what they're doing way more. We're oceanographers. We're really good at that. Cameras we're working on. So we have people that will dive with the cameras and then we come back up and we can make the image you see on the bottom right. This is a P-39 off of Papua New Guinea from World War II with one MAA aboard. And you can see there's a meter stick and a north arrow in the bottom right, because in archaeology, you have to always have those. Yes, you need to know how large your site is and which direction's north. But then there's one more thing we do. We make it 3D. And once we get into the 3D area, now we can start to do all the really fun things. So we use things like this. This is one that's one of our sample ones that we travel with all over the country to show people the capabilities we have in-house. And so this is a screen capture of the 3D model, but we use virtual reality systems so that people can put on the goggles and we can take them down to the site. So if we have family members or friends or colleagues, we can actually, no matter how old they are, if their eyes still work, we can bring them down and let them see the site where their loved ones lost their life. And that's a wonderful gift and tool to be able to give to the people. For recovery purposes, we can also put the virtual reality to good use. Again, a lot of times they're very murky environments. The military divers that are performing the recovery, they can't see the whole wreck. So if we can show them in virtual reality what parts of the wreck to go to and how to work through the system, that becomes very useful. And like a lot of the groups, we just started moving into holographs. This picture on the screen is incredibly underwhelming, but when you're looking at it in the holograph environment and it's coming out of the screen, it's actually really cool. And the holograph is nice because now we can see a wreck in 3D and you don't have to have goggles on. Anyone in the room can see it and walk around. So that's another tool that we're starting to explore for communicating our data and data display. Anytime we find a site, we stop over the site in the middle of the ocean and we have a ceremony to honor all the souls that were lost at that location. And what we'll do is there's some speeches, we read each person's name, and there's a ceremonial folding of an American flag that we can hand back to the family members of the deceased. So I'd like to take a minute to thank all of our sponsors and team members from all different organizations and all over the world, and especially mention the MIA families. That's what we're doing this. That's what it's all about. I'm lucky enough to be part of a team that we're all oceanographers and we get to do this. So I'll close with a picture from Palau. It really looks like that. If you haven't gone, highly recommend it as soon as we can. And just a slide thanking you and some more information. The article listed on the top right is about the technologies that we have developed here at Scripps to aid underwater archaeological searches and identification techniques, and also our nonprofit's main site, Project Recover, and a link to a video that was made that really explains what we do, how we do it, and what it looks like. So I'll open up to questions and thank you for your time.
Wow, Heidi, thank you so much. That was incredible work. And I think thank you for sharing that. As we saw several comments come in, incredible work, amazing work, and having a better understanding of that. So for those interested, go ahead and still put Q&A. You can put questions into the Q&A. Heidi, I have so many questions for you, but let's start with those that actually have come into the Q&A. So this is from Philip, and I think you can see them as well. Is what kind of computer or hard drive, graphics card, et cetera, do you use for processing of photogrammetry?
So photogrammetry processing, we have multiple things that we do. So when we're in the field, up until 2019, we were using just a really souped up laptop, 16 gigs of RAM, no, 64 gigs of RAM, sorry, 64 gigs of RAM and a really nice video card. And you could buy external video card components. So we call it a cube, and you could put a really fancy, hideously expensive, but really amazingly fast video card in there, connect it and work with it. Drivers and technology have changed in the past year and a half, and that is no longer the preferred way to do it. In the field, we still do that because that's the best we have in the field. Back in the lab, we have a dedicated processing server that has multiple cores for huge video cards, although most Agisoft processing now, you just need one really big video card. So we have 4 good video cards, and then we have, I think, maybe the 256 gigs of RAM. It's a good machine. It's a good machine. And still, some of the processing can take days, depending on how many images and how much resolution you want. If you want to do things that look like the Hawaii image, that can be done just with the mid-tier or better NVIDIA video card and 16 gigs of RAM in about 4 days. I'm not sure if that answered the question adequately or not.
Philip, if it didn't, go ahead and add some comments in there and we can respond to those. Thanks, Heidi. So this one has come in from Francesca. Great presentations. Are you sharing your 3D models publicly? Are you placing them in any kind of repository, database, archive for preservation and or digital publication?
At this point, well, let me explain a little bit about oceanography data and how data is collected by oceanographers. Generally, historically in oceanography, if you collect the data, you own it. But in more recent times, whoever pays you to collect the data owns it. So all of our work we did in Kiska, Alaska was paid for by NOAA. So they technically own those data sets. And then there's many other data sets that I can only show things that are old because we don't have permission to share yet. So we're a newer group with Project Recover. We're new to the technology part of this. We're new. We've only been doing this since 2014. So at this point, we don't have any public way of sharing the 3D data. A lot of groups are sharing things with the public through Sketchfab, and we do use Sketchfab extensively. We would love to start sharing more with the public. At this point, we are not able to do so. It will come, but with archaeological data, and especially we are talking about MIA resting places. So until the recovery has happened and the family has been notified, we can't even tell anybody what site we're at. So there, unfortunately, there is quite a time lag there.
Yeah, you mentioned at least maybe sometimes 3 to 4 years between when you discover and when the recovery can actually happen. So
yes, we're working mostly in other countries, and there's a lot of working together with different agencies that has to take place for any kind of work such as this to happen in most of these other countries.
Great, so more questions keep coming in, keep them coming. So this one's from Andrew. Is there any effort to use machine learning to filter out noise like the fish returns? Are you relying on human object recognition?
So for the AI portion, for the side scan sonar, most of this, we use sonar with software, which has a lot of AI built into it, mostly for detecting boulders. We don't use that part because usually it detects everything and we are just looking for specific wreckage. So we have to use our eyes, but we are working currently on different ways of using AI for side scan sonar. Yeah, it's in progress. It's an emerging field. Not many people do it because the data is hard to come by. But yeah, that is in progress. Great question. AI is really fun.
So here's one from JP. Can you speak about your experience in collaborating with institutions? Have you ever created exhibitions that exist at somewhere like museums? Would be interested in the process of how this community connects to institutions.
Yeah, we actually work quite a bit with different institutions, and that's mostly on the Project Recover's nonprofit side, not through Scripps. We're the oceanographers. So we did an outreach program for local high schools last year at the USS Midway Museum. And for a while, the Birch Aquarium had some of our imagery in one of their exhibits. There are plans in place. We're trying to partner with many museums around the country because this topic is so close to so many people's heart. And we have a unique set of tools to help us find these areas and items. We have some real unique data. So it's underway. Most of the time we see institutions very willing to work with us once they see our data. The problem is some of these things unfortunately do take money. And right now is not a good time for most museums and the like to have adequate funding put in place. I mean, with the COVID situation, most places aren't even open right now, right? So it's underway and it's definitely things we'd like to explore. And we do have a team of people working on that right now. Yes, and most of the time people are very willing to work with us. And we're willing to share everything we can. We think that's the important part about this particular data set. This isn't one that we have to keep quiet. This is really important stuff. And it means a lot to many people.
That's wonderful, Heidi. And I think you had showed early on in the presentation that Project Recover is currently working on 500 sites and over 2,400 MIAs recovered. Is that the current, or that's what you've already been able to discover / recover?
Those are the number of cases that we're currently tracking. So we haven't been to all of those sites. If you go to the projectrecover.org website, and you go through it and search for the annual reports. Each year we publish an annual report of all the field work and all the finds that we're allowed to share for any given year. So that information is readily available on that website. No, those are just the cases that someone within the organization has flagged as someplace that there's a known case in that region that would be appropriate for our instrumentation and our team to visit. So we have more than 450 of those we have not visited yet.
Wow. An incredible amount of work that you've already done and an incredible amount of work still to be done. Yeah, so Heidi, I want to thank you so much for your time in this presentation. It was an incredible presentation to hear the work that you're doing, but also the impact that it has on humans around the world. So thank you for your time. And for those that joined us today, thank you. You'll see at this point, there is a wrap up to celebrate the end of our UCGIS week, the inaugural one. So go ahead and I think Liz maybe can put that in the chat for everyone, the direct link over there, but sort of a celebration, but also getting feedback. And remember that we also have the feedback channel in our Slack to also provide any feedback on this year's event so that we can help plan for next year, and also maybe if you're interested. So Heidi, again, thank you. And I will follow up with all of my other questions at another point in time, but truly incredible work. And thank you all, and we'll see you over in the MAPI celebration wrap-up session. So it starts right now. You can bring your own beverage or bring your own food. There will be none in that virtual room, so we'll see you over there.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thank you so much.
See everyone.